Restoring Men and History. Benjamin Rush said this about the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Do you recollect the pensive and awful silence which pervaded the House when we were called up, one after another, to the table of the President of Congress to subscribe what was believed by many at the time to be our own death warrants? But let's look at how we got there to the signing, to the writing of the Declaration. 1754, French and Indian War starts. February 1763, Treaty of Versailles is signed. That ends the French and Indian War. But what happened? What do most wars do, gentlemen? They cost the country that goes to war a lot of money. And Britain had a lot of debt, and they said, hey, how about we make the colonists pay off some of this debt? They were in it too. So 1764, they do the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act says that smugglers can be tried without a jury. 1765, they do the Stamp Act. What was that? Stamp Act was a tax on all paper goods and legal documents, and a lot of people were upset with that. The colonists did not like it. So the grievances start to build, and that's what you will hear in the Declaration of Independence, these grievances. 1765, the Quartering Act. This is a big grievance that's going to be talked about here in a minute. Now the colonists had to house soldiers. Imagine that. Now you've got to put soldiers in your house and even feed them. Of course, that later goes into the Bill of Rights. They never wanted soldiers in their houses again, as well as they'd never wanted, many people never wanted standing armies again, and many never wanted them in their house again. 1766, Parliament passes the Declaratory Act, which states they have authority over the colonies. The Townshend Act, 1767, that taxed goods imported into the colonies, tea, glass, and other things. 1768, troops sent to Boston. 1770, you had the Boston Massacre. The tea tax was done to protect the East Indian Company, 1773. Boston Tea Party then occurred in late 1773. Coercive Acts of 1774 was one of the major acts of that, was the closing of the Boston port. March 23rd, Patrick Henry gives the famous "Give me liberty or death" speech. Phenomenal speech. April 18th, Dr. Joseph Warren gets information. British are going to march on Concord. He calls Paul Revere, William Dawes. He says, go warn the militias about the British plans. There's an interesting point in the story where Revere and Dawes were told to look up. There would be a signal. Lanterns would be the signal. They had been told to look at the steeple of Boston's Old North Church. If one was hung, the British would arrive by land. If two, by sea. 2 lanterns were put up. Samuel Prescott, another writer, also rode to Concord and arrived there to warn others. All these men took a risk. They had valor. Paul Revere had gotten held up by the British. William Dawes had a horse problem. But they were warned. Battle of Lexington and Concord then happens April 19th. About 700 British troops had marched and arrived in Lexington. Over 70 militiamen had gathered on the town green. And the Americans were told to disperse and about to leave when some shots were fired. Some people got wounded. The British then marched on to Concord to go after the arms. This is a good point right here. Notice the British want to take the arms away from the Americans. Why? Because they don't want to be shot back yet, right? So the Second Amendment goes way back before this. This didn't cause the Second Amendment because it goes way back to the Magna Carta and Castle and the English rights. And but that's a different subject. We're not going to get into the Second Amendment. The point is they wanted to take the arms. And a tyrant does not want people armed. So anyway, individual right to bear arms is important, and that's not for today. Concord North Bridge. It's now famous. A group of British regulars were there, and the militiamen moved there too. Now this is famous for this reason. A shot was fired. No one knows which side it came from. However, it was called the shot heard round the world. in Congress, July 4th, 1776. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, and to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the right of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. He's obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them from a mock trial, from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging the boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, destruction, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in our attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice, and of consequently, we must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So let's go back. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Webster's defines unalienable as impossible to give up or take away. You have unalienable rights. These men wrote it down on a piece of paper. Your unalienable rights cannot be taken away. These rights do not come from government. They come from where? They stated here, you are endowed by your Creator with certain unalienable rights. Your rights come from God, not from government. And now, why are governments created according to this document? It says it here, to secure these rights. And what kind of right is it in another way? Is it a collective or individual right that you have? It's an individual right, right? All individuals have these rights. So what's the purpose of government according to this document? To secure these rights. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. These 56 men risked everything. What would have been the penalty if they had been caught? Kay Hutchinson wrote this from Hutchinson Leader. By signing the document, the 56 men risk high treason against the King of England. In essence, they signed their death warrants because that was the penalty. However, death was not simple or quick. It was a process. First, the guilty party was to be hanged until unconscious, then cut down and reviewed, then disemboweled and beheaded, then cut in quarters. Each quarter was to be boiled in oil. The remnants were scattered abroad so that the last resting place of the offender would remain forever unnamed, unhonored, and unknown. In addition to death, all of the offender's earthly goods were confiscated by the state. The family could own no property, and this dictate extended to future heirs. So what happened to the signers? Matthew Spalding pulled this from sources and wrote this, and he says, 11 signers had their homes and property destroyed. Francis Lewis's New York home was razed and his wife taken prisoner. John Hart's farm and mills were destroyed when the British invaded New Jersey, and he died while fleeing capture. Carter, Braxton, and Nelson, both of Virginia, lent large sums of their personal fortunes, but they were never repaid. Sacrifice, right? Valor. So they had virtues. And when they put their name on it, they knew they were risking their life, fortune, family. Skipping ahead, September 18th, 1787, to the Constitutional Convention, the last day of the convention, a lady asked Dr. Franklin, well, doctor, what have we got, a republic or a monarchy? He replied back, a republic, if you can keep it. So who's it up to keep it? The republic. It's up to us, right? You, me, everybody. Ronald Reagan said this, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. 56 men had an opportunity to stand for liberty. And they did it. And they risked it all. And your opportunity is here today. That was a great moment in history. This is an exceptional moment in history. And it's yours. It's your moment. Stand for liberty. Stand for unalienable rights. To stand for this country we love, called the United States of America. Thank you. Happy 4th of July, and God bless America.